In 1720, the richest man in the world wasn't a king. He wasn't born into nobility. 3 years earlier, he'd been a convicted killer on the run with a bounty on his head. By 1720, he personally controlled more wealth than most European monarchies combined. Crowds camped outside his house every morning, begging for a chance to give him their money. He had, quite literally, invented paper money for an entire nation. 90 days later, he fled that same country in disguise, and died broke in exile. This is the story of John Law, the man who accidentally invented one of the first modern economies, then watched it collapse in a way that still shapes how central banks operate today. To understand how a fugitive gambler ended up running the French economy, we need to go back to Scotland, 1694. John Law was a brilliant mathematician with a gambling habit and a dangerous temper. In 1694, he killed a man in a duel over a woman, and was sentenced to death for it. He escaped prison and fled across Europe, bouncing between gambling halls in Amsterdam, Venice, and Genoa. But Law wasn't just gambling for fun, he was obsessively studying how money actually worked. And he developed a radical idea, decades ahead of its time, that a country's wealth didn't need to be tied to gold and silver sitting in a vault. Paper currency, backed by confidence and economic activity instead of metal, could make an economy grow faster than anyone imagined. Nobody wanted to hear this idea, until he found a country desperate enough to try it. That country was France. And in 1715, France was in serious trouble. King Louis XIV had just died, leaving behind catastrophic war debts. France was, in modern terms, functionally bankrupt. The crown owed more than it could ever collect in taxes. The new regent, Philippe of Orleans, needed a miracle. John Law offered him one. Law proposed founding a national bank that would issue paper banknotes people could trust because they were backed by the bank's assets, not just royal promises. The regent, with no better options, said yes. In 1716, Law's bank opened, and it worked almost immediately. Trade picked up. Confidence returned. People started to actually prefer paper notes over heavy, inconvenient coins. Then Law went even bigger. He took control of the Mississippi Company, a business holding a monopoly on trade with France's massive Louisiana territory in North America. Law marketed it as an almost unimaginable opportunity, untapped gold, silver, and endless farmland waiting in the New World. He was, in modern terms, running one of the greatest marketing campaigns in history, and almost none of the extravagant promises about Louisiana's riches were true. It didn't matter. People believed it, and belief was the entire engine. Shares in Law's Mississippi Company went on sale to the public, and demand became something close to mass hysteria. Crowds of thousands packed the street outside Law's home every single day. Nobles waited alongside servants. It said a duchess arranged for her own carriage to be overturned nearby just to create a disturbance, so Law's coachman would be forced to stop and she could speak with him directly. Share prices exploded. An initial share price around 500 livres shot past 10,000 livres within months. Ordinary people who bought early became instant millionaires. The word millionaire itself is often credited to this exact period, coined to describe the sudden new fortunes Law's scheme created. By 1720, Law wasn't just a financier, he was appointed Controller General of Finances for the entire Kingdom of France. A convicted killer and former fugitive was now, functionally, running the French economy. He was, briefly, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men alive. But the entire system had one enormous flaw: the number of paper banknotes and shares in circulation had grown far beyond what the actual Louisiana Territory, or the bank's real assets, could ever be worth. Some wealthy investors, including members of the French nobility, quietly started noticing the gap between the promises and the reality. They began quietly converting their paper shares back into gold and silver. Once word spread that some insiders were cashing out, the confidence that had powered the entire scheme began to crack. By mid-1720, the panic was total. Banknote values collapsed. Share prices crashed from their 10,000 livre peak toward almost nothing. Riots broke out in Paris. Some accounts describe people being trampled to death in the crush outside the bank, desperate to exchange their now worthless paper for anything of real value. Law, the man who'd been begged for meetings just months earlier, was now blamed for the entire disaster. He fled France in disguise before the year was even over, and spent the rest of his life in exile, gambling to survive, and died in Venice, largely broke, just 9 years later. Here's what makes John Law's story different from most financial collapses. This wasn't a slow-moving mistake made by a faceless institution. This was one man's economic theory, a genuinely brilliant idea about paper currency, pushed to its absolute extreme, powered almost entirely by belief instead of substance. So here's my question for you. Was John Law a visionary who was centuries ahead of his time, or was he a con artist who got lucky before he got caught? Tell me your verdict in the comments. I've seen people argue passionately for both sides, and honestly, I still go back and forth myself. If stories like this, a single person's rise and fall reshaping an entire nation's economy, are exactly what you come here for, hit subscribe, because this channel is built entirely around finding these forgotten characters' history almost erased. Thanks for watching. Which part of this surprised you the most? Let me know below, and if you want more forgotten history like this, subscribe, there's a lot more coming.